Before we begin, please note that this presentation is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The content discusses topics related to finance, career paths, and mental health within the legal profession, but it is not a substitute for professional financial, legal, or medical advice. The views expressed are based on research, interviews, and anecdotal evidence, and do not represent the official stance of any legal institution. Your individual circumstances may vary, and you should always consult with a qualified professional before making any significant life decisions. Everything you think you know about being a lawyer is a lie. It's a carefully constructed billion-dollar fantasy sold to you on television and in movie theaters. You see Harvey Specter walking into a glass-walled corner office, oozing confidence, closing a multi-million-dollar deal with a single devastatingly clever line. You see Jack McCoy in a courtroom, delivering a passionate closing argument that sways the jury and puts the bad guy behind bars for life. You see power, prestige, and a seven-figure salary. You see a clear path to the American dream, paved with mahogany desks and tailored suits. That is the fantasy. Now here is the reality. It's 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. The only light in a 50-story skyscraper is coming from your office. You're on your fourth cup of coffee, which now tastes like battery acid. You haven't seen sunlight in 2 days. You are surrounded by a literal mountain of documents, thousands of pages of mind-numbing contractual clauses for a corporate merger you barely understand, and you're searching for a single misplaced comma that could cost your client millions. Your eyes are burning. Your shoulders ache. You have a pit in your stomach because you know that even if you find it, your reward will be another bigger mountain of documents tomorrow. This isn't a job. It's a sentence. And the worst part? You're paying over $2,000 a month every month for the privilege of living this nightmare, thanks to a mountain of student debt that feels more like a lifelong mortgage on your own soul. This is the untold story of being a lawyer in modern America. And over the next 10 parts, we are going to pull back the curtain on the entire profession. We're not just going to peek behind it, we are going to rip it to shreds. We'll expose why law schools are churning out a generation of indebted, depressed, and disillusioned graduates. We'll uncover the brutal reality of the billable hour and the big law machine that grinds up young associates and spits them out. We'll explore the silent mental health crisis that is ravaging the industry, leading to rates of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse that are staggeringly higher than almost any other profession. But this isn't just a story of despair. It's also a guide. We're going to show you the escape routes, the alternative paths, the ways that real lawyers have hacked the system to build fulfilling, meaningful, and financially successful careers outside of the traditional soul-crushing mold. Whether you are a college student thinking about taking the LSAT, a law student drowning in debt, a young lawyer questioning every decision that led you here, or even just someone fascinated by the hidden mechanics of one of America's most powerful and misunderstood professions, this series is for you. We are going to give you the brutal, unvarnished truth that no law school brochure or television show ever will. So, where does this massive disconnect between the dream and the reality begin? It starts long before you ever step foot in a courtroom. It begins with a filter. The entire legal education system in America isn't just a system for teaching law. It's a 3-year, high-stakes, high-pressure assembly line designed to do 3 things. First, to saddle you with an immense amount of debt. Second, to fundamentally rewire the way your brain works. And third, to sort you into a rigid hierarchy from which it is incredibly difficult to escape. Let's start with the price of admission, the debt. The average law school graduate in the United States leaves school with over $160,000 in student loans. For top-tier private schools, that number can easily soar past $250,000. Let that sink in. Before you've earned your first dollar as a lawyer, before you've even passed the bar exam, you are starting your professional life in a financial hole so deep you can't see the top. This isn't an accident. It's a feature of the system. This debt acts as a pair of golden handcuffs, shackling you to a specific career path from day one. You might have gone to law school with noble dreams of being a public defender, an environmental lawyer, or working for a nonprofit. But when you're staring down a monthly loan payment that's bigger than most people's rent, that 6-figure starting salary at a massive corporate law firm doesn't just look attractive. It looks like the only life raft in a stormy sea. The debt forces your hand. It narrows your choices. It funnels the best and the brightest students full of passion and idealism directly into the jaws of the corporate machine, whether they want to go or not. The system leverages your ambition against you, using debt as its primary tool of control. But the financial cost is only part of the story. The second, and perhaps more profound transformation happens inside your head. It's the process of learning to think like a lawyer. This is the holy grail of legal education, the mantra repeated by professors from the very first day of class. And it starts with a brutal psychological hazing ritual known as the Socratic method. For those who haven't experienced it, imagine being in a stadium-style lecture hall with 100 of the most competitive, intelligent people you've ever met. The professor, an expert in their field, picks a name at random, your name. They then proceed to grill you relentlessly on the intricate details of a dense 100-year-old legal case you were supposed to have read and perfectly memorized the night before. They poke holes in your logic. They twist your words. They push you into intellectual corners until you contradict yourself. The goal isn't to teach you the answer. The goal is to break down your existing way of thinking, to strip away your reliance on emotion, intuition, or common sense, and to rebuild it from the ground up on a foundation of cold, hard, analytical logic. This process, repeated day after day for 3 years, changes you. It makes you sharper, more analytical, and incredibly skilled at spotting flaws in an argument. But it can also make you more cynical, more confrontational, and more detached. You learn to argue any side of any issue, regardless of your personal beliefs. You begin to see the world not as a tapestry of human experiences, but as a series of issues to be spotted, facts to be analyzed, and risks to be managed. The part of your brain that connects with people on an emotional, empathetic level starts to get quieter, while the part that deconstructs arguments gets louder. You are being forged into a tool, an intellectual weapon, and while that's an incredibly powerful thing to be, it often comes at a significant personal cost, creating a distance between you and the non-lawyer world, a world that suddenly seems messy, illogical, and frustratingly imprecise. So now you've survived. You're $250,000 in debt, your brain has been rewired, and you've been ranked and sorted against your peers like a prize racehorse. You've passed the bar exam, a grueling 2-day test of mental endurance. You've made it. You are officially a lawyer. You walk into your new job at a prestigious firm, ready to finally start the dream. But what you're about to discover is that you haven't just graduated from law school. You've just graduated into a far more demanding and unforgiving system. A system built not on learning or justice, but on a single tyrannical metric that will dictate every minute of your waking life: the billable hour. And that is where the real story, the one that breaks so many promising careers, truly begins. The billable hour. It's a concept that sounds innocuous, almost boring, an accounting tool. But in the ecosystem of a modern law firm, it is not a tool. It is the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the God you serve. Your life, once measured in moments, in relationships, in achievements, is now atomized. It is broken down into 6-minute increments. 1/10 of an hour. 0.1. That is your new unit of existence. From your very first day as a junior associate, you are handed a set of billing codes and shown a piece of software that will become your shadow. It's a digital timesheet, a confessional, a constant nagging reminder that every second you are not actively billing is a second you are failing. Thinking about a case strategy in the shower? Can't bill for it. Reading a legal blog to stay current? Can't bill for it. Talking to a colleague about a case for 5 minutes in the hallway? That's not a conversation. That's a potential 0.1, but only if you can justify it. Only if you can tie it to a specific client matter number. Suddenly, the world splits into 2 distinct categories: billable and non-billable. And the non-billable becomes synonymous with worthless. A phone call from your mother is no longer just a conversation. It's a 20-minute block of time you can't account for on your timesheet. It's a 0.3 hole in your day. Lunch is not for nourishment. It's a strategic decision. Do you eat at your desk while reviewing documents, capturing that precious time? Or do you risk going out, knowing that the clock is ticking not on your lunch break but on your annual requirement? And that requirement is the first number that truly matters, far more than your law school GPA or your rank on the law review. It's the firm's billable hour target. For many big firms, this number hovers around 1,900 or 2,000 hours a year. Some demand 2,200 or more. Now, you might hear 2,000 hours and think, okay, that's just a 40-hour week with a few weeks of vacation. I can do that. And you would be catastrophically wrong. Because 2,000 billable hours is a universe away from 2,000 hours spent in an office. Remember the great divide. Billable versus non-billable. Every minute you spend on firm meetings, on training, on marketing events, on administrative tasks, on trying to find work from busy partners, on going to the bathroom, on staring blankly at your screen in exhaustion. None of that counts. That is your time, not the client's. The grim reality is that to build 2,000 hours, you will likely spend closer to 3,000 hours at your desk. Let's do the math. Assuming you take 2 weeks of vacation, you're working 50 weeks a year. To hit 2,000 billable hours, you need to bill 40 hours a week every single week without fail. That's 8 billable hours a day, Monday through Friday. But on an average day, a young associate might only be able to capture 70 to 80% of their office time as billable. The rest is lost to the ether of non-billable necessity. So, to get your 8 billable hours, you need to be in the office for 10 or 11 hours. That's a 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. day every day, before you even factor in the inevitable weekend work. This system rewires your brain. You stop thinking about tasks and start thinking in tenths of an hour. You write an email. You log it. 0.1 correspondence to client regarding status of discovery. You have a phone call. You log it. 0.2 teleconference with opposing counsel scheduling dispute. Your entire day becomes a series of frantic, meticulous entries into a spreadsheet, a desperate attempt to piece together a full day from these tiny, monetized fragments of your life. And it creates a deep, pervasive anxiety. What if you only have 6 billable hours at the end of the day? The pressure is immense. You stay later. You wander the halls, hoping a senior partner will see you and give you an assignment. You reread documents you've already read, trying to justify billing a little more time. This is where the ethical lines begin to blur. The temptation to pad your hours, to turn that 0.1 email into a 0.2, is a devil on the shoulder of every associate fighting for survival. Most resist, terrified of being caught and disbarred. But the pressure is always there. A low hum of desperation beneath the polished mahogany and expensive suits. The firm doesn't care if you were brilliant for 4 hours. It cares if you were billable for 8. Your value is no longer in your intellect or your creativity. It is in your stamina. You are a cog in a machine designed to convert human time into revenue, and the firm is constantly monitoring your output. Every month, a report circulates showing where every associate stands on their hours. It's a leaderboard of exhaustion. Falling behind is not an option. It's a signal that you're not a team player, that you don't have what it takes. And what about that 6-figure salary they gave you? The one that felt like you'd won the lottery? You quickly realize it's not a salary. It's a retainer. The firm isn't paying you for your legal mind. They are paying for the exclusive rights to your time, all of it. They are prepaying for your canceled plans, your missed birthdays, your non-existent hobbies, and your strained relationships. It's the ultimate transaction. Your life in exchange for their money. These are the golden handcuffs, and they snap shut on your very first day. The psychological toll is immense. You are monetizing your own existence, and in doing so, you devalue any part of it that cannot be billed. Your sense of self-worth becomes inextricably tied to a number on a spreadsheet. You are no longer a person who is a lawyer. You are a lawyer who is a collection of billable increments. This is the hidden curriculum of the modern law firm. It's a lesson taught not in a classroom, but in the silent pressure of an empty timesheet at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. You learn that the law is not a profession but a business. A very, very demanding business. You've accepted the system, you've memorized your billing codes, you're chained to your desk by a mountain of student debt and a glittering salary. And then, the first real assignment lands on your desk. A thick, intimidating file filled with the problems of a faceless corporation. And you realize, with a dawning, chilling clarity, that the billable hour was just the cage. The work itself. That's the beast you're now trapped inside with. The beast has 1,000 names. Due diligence. Document review. E-discovery. Sounds important, technical. What it really is an exercise in organized madness. You're in what they call the data room, which isn't a room at all, but a virtual folder filled with hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of documents. Emails, contracts, memos, spreadsheets. Your job is to read them. All of them. You're looking for a single sentence, a misplaced comma, a date that doesn't line up in a 50-page agreement that could create a liability for the multi-billion-dollar merger your firm is handling. You spend 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, staring at a screen, your eyes burning from the blue light, your mind numb from the sheer volume of meaningless text. You're not creating anything. You're not helping an individual. You're a highly paid, Ivy League-educated proofreader, a human search engine, looking for a needle of risk in a haystack of corporate jargon. The only thing you produce at the end of the day is a spreadsheet, A color-coded log of potential issues that a partner, who makes 10 times what you do, will glance at for 5 minutes before a conference call. This is the reality of big law for a junior associate. You are the smallest gear in a colossal machine that turns money into more money. You never meet the client. You never see the factory that's being acquired or the product that's being patented. Your entire world shrinks to the size of a PDF document. You eat lunch at your desk, a sad, overpriced salad, while flagging privilege on emails from 2007. You eat dinner at your desk, lukewarm takeout, while redlining a purchase agreement that could have been written by an AI. You start to forget what sunlight feels like. Your friends from college, the ones who became teachers or artists or nurses, they post pictures of their lives. Hikes, parties, weekend trips. You see their posts at 2 in the morning. While you're waiting for a senior associate to send back comments on a memo you've already revised 17 times. And you feel a pang of something you can't quite name. It's not just jealousy. It's a deeper, more profound sense of loss. But then the first of the month hits, and you see it. A number in your bank account so large it feels like a typo. After taxes, after your 401k contribution, it's still more money than your parents made together in a year. And suddenly the cage doesn't feel so bad. It feels gilded. This is the second and far more insidious trap of modern law, the golden handcuffs. That first paycheck is a revelation. The crushing weight of your student loans, that six-figure monster that's been squatting on your soul for years, suddenly seems manageable. You can actually pay it off. Not in 30 years, but in maybe 5 or 6. The freedom that idea represents is intoxicating. So you make the first big payment. Then you think, I've been working so hard, I deserve something nice. So you move out of your tiny apartment with 3 roommates and get your own place. A nice place in a nice building with a doorman and a gym. Your rent triples, but you can afford it. You start buying nicer clothes because you have to look the part. You start going out to fancy dinners with your colleagues on the rare night you get out before 10 p.m., dropping $300 on a meal without blinking, because that's what everyone does. This is lifestyle inflation, and it happens so fast you don't even see the bars of the cage being built around you. Each purchase, each new monthly payment is another lock. The nice apartment, the car lease, the expensive watch, the vacations you plan but always have to cancel because of work. You're no longer just working to pay off your loans. You're working to maintain the life you've built on the foundation of your massive salary. The idea of leaving, of taking a pay cut to do something you might actually enjoy becomes terrifying. How would you afford your rent? Your car? How would you go back to a life without seamless delivery for every whim and want? The golden handcuffs click shut, and they are surprisingly comfortable. And there's another layer to it. The external validation. You go home for the holidays, and your relatives look at you with a new respect. You're the lawyer, the successful one. Your parents are bursting with pride, telling all their friends that their child works at a prestigious firm in the city. Your own friends are impressed, even if they don't understand what you do. Wow, you must be killing it, they say. And you nod and smile because what else are you going to do? Tell them you spent the last 80 hours reading other people's emails and feel like a hollowed-out shell of a human being? No, you can't complain. You have no right to complain. You're making more money than all of them combined. Complaining would make you sound ungrateful, spoiled. So you play the part. You talk about the big deal you're working on using vague, important-sounding terms. You buy a round of expensive drinks. You project an aura of success and power, because that's what everyone expects. But the dissonance between the outside perception and your internal reality starts to feel like a low-grade fever, a constant humming sickness in your gut. And then one day the first rail crack appears in the facade. For me it was a Tuesday. We were 3 weeks into a massive deal, and I hadn't had a day off. I was working on a side project for a smaller client, a chemical company being sued because their runoff had allegedly contaminated the groundwater of a small town in rural Appalachia. My job was to go through the town's medical records, which we had subpoenaed, and find alternative causes for the cancer cluster that had emerged. I was looking for reasons to blame the victims. Did they smoke? Did they have a family history of cancer? Did they work in a different factory 20 years ago? I spent an entire day reading the most intimate, tragic details of these people's lives. Diagnoses, chemotherapy schedules, the medical records of their children. These weren't faceless corporations. These were people. A 45-year-old father of 3 with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, a 32-year-old woman with leukemia. And my job, my 6-figure prestigious job, was to build a legal argument that their suffering was their own damn fault. not the fault of the corporation that was paying my firm millions of dollars. That night, I was walking to the subway at 1 a.m. The city was quiet. I looked up at the monolithic glass tower where I worked, 100 floors of light, filled with thousands of people just like me, all fighting for faceless, formless entities. And for the first time, I didn't feel pride. I felt disgust. I felt like a mercenary. I was using my brain, my education, my entire life's ambition not to help people but to protect capital, to shield the powerful from the consequences of their actions. I had wanted to be Atticus Finch, but I had become one of the men he would have fought against. And in that moment, standing on a deserted street corner in the middle of the night, the weight of it all came crashing down. The money in my bank account felt dirty. The praise from my family felt fraudulent. The respect from my friends felt unearned. The entire elaborate construction of my professional life was revealed for what it was: a beautiful, expensive, and utterly empty cage. And I realized the beast I was trapped with wasn't just the work. It was the slow, methodical erosion of my own soul. I had no idea how to get out, but for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that I had to. The only question was, what would I have to break to escape? The first thing you have to break is the illusion. The illusion that the money is worth it. They call them the golden handcuffs for a reason. They're heavy, they're cold, but damn are they shiny. When you get that first big law paycheck, it feels like Monopoly money. You've never seen a number that big with your name next to it. After years of ramen noodles and shared apartments in law school, living on student loans that felt like a dark cloud gathering on the horizon, this paycheck feels like the sun breaking through. Feels like security. Feels like success. So you do what you think you're supposed to do. You upgrade. You get the one-bedroom apartment in the trendy part of town with floor-to-ceiling windows instead of the cramped studio with a view of a brick wall. You stop pre-gaming at home and start buying $10 craft beers at the bar with your friends. You buy the suit that costs more than your first car. You take the vacation you've always dreamed of. You tell yourself you've earned it. And you have. You've traded your time, your sleep, your mental health, your very life force for this money. So you spend it because spending it is the only way to feel like the sacrifice means something. But it's a trap. A brilliant, meticulously designed trap. Because within 6 months, that shocking, life-changing salary becomes your new baseline. The nice apartment isn't a luxury anymore. It's just rent. The expensive dinners aren't a treat. They're just Tuesday. Your lifestyle inflates to perfectly match, or often exceed, your income. And those student loans? That dark cloud? It's still there, and now it's raining interest. You're making more money than you ever thought possible. Yet somehow you feel just as broke as you did in law school. Only now you're surrounded by nicer things you're terrified of losing. The golden handcuffs have clicked shut. This is when the great lie begins. The lie every associate tells themselves. Just one more year. You hear it whispered in the hallways, over late-night takeout at the office. I'll just stick it out for one more bonus cycle. Then I'll pay off my loans and I'm out. It becomes a mantra. Prayer. You create a spreadsheet. You calculate exactly how many months of this misery it will take to reach that magic number in your savings account, the number that represents freedom. But it's a moving target. Because next year you get a raise. A substantial one. And the bonus is bigger than you expected. And suddenly the math changes. The lifestyle you could afford on last year's salary feels like a downgrade. The idea of leaving this fire hose of cash for a normal job with a normal salary starts to feel not just difficult but fiscally irresponsible. Insane even. You'd be walking away from a fortune. What would your parents say? What would your friends think? You're on the partner track at one of the best firms in the world. People would kill for your job. Leaving is admitting failure. So you tell yourself the lie again. Okay, just one more year. For real this time. I lived in that lie for 2 years. 2 years of spreadsheets and false promises. My escape plan was a fantasy novel I read to myself before another sleepless night. I started to look for a way out, a side door. The most common escape route you hear about is going in-house. Becoming a lawyer for a company instead of a law firm. It's presented as the promised land. Better hours, better work-life balance, you only have one client, and you get stock options. So I started looking. Polished my resume. I took calls with recruiters. And I quickly discovered that the promised land was more of a mirage. First, the pay cut was significant. Not just a small step back, but a leap off a financial cliff. All my one more year calculations would be blown to pieces. I'd be starting over. Second, the jobs themselves weren't what I imagined. In a law firm, you're a profit center. You bill hours, you bring in money, you are the engine of the business. In a company, the legal department is a cost center. You're the department of no. You're the one who slows down the exciting business deals with risk assessments and contract reviews. You're not the star quarterback anymore. You're the guy who carries the water bottles. And the culture. I interviewed at a trendy tech company. Everyone was in hoodies and sneakers. There were ping pong tables and free kombucha on tap. It looked like a paradise compared to my stuffy office. But when I talked to the lawyers there, I heard the same exhaustion in their voices. They weren't billing hours, but they were on call 24/7, expected to answer Slack messages at midnight, chained to their laptops during their kids' soccer games. The cage was different, maybe a little more comfortable, but it was still a cage. The bars were just made of stock options instead of billable hours. My breaking point with that fantasy came during a conversation with a senior partner at my firm, a man named Marcus. He was one of the good ones. He had a family, he seemed to leave at a reasonable hour, and he always asked how you were doing and actually listened to the answer. I saw him as a potential model for a sustainable life in this world. One evening, he saw the light on in my office around 10 p.m. and popped his head in. He asked if I was holding up okay. And for some reason I was too tired to lie. I told him I was struggling, that I was thinking about other options, maybe going in-house. I expected a lecture or maybe a pep talk. Instead, he just nodded slowly, a sad, knowing smile on his face. He sat down in the chair across from my desk. He said, "I get it. I was you 25 years ago, ready to burn it all down." He told me about his own crisis of faith, how he almost left to go work for the government. He painted a vivid picture of the relief he imagined he'd feel, and then he leaned forward. "But let me ask you something," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Do you want to spend your career reviewing marketing copy? Do you want your biggest professional achievement to be negotiating the lease for a new regional office? Here," he said, gesturing around my office at the stacks of documents, the glowing computer screen. "Here we do the most sophisticated work in the world. We are at the absolute center of the financial universe. The deals we do make the front page of the Wall Street Journal. What you're doing right now, in this room, matters on a global scale. It's hard. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But it's not boring. And you'll never be more relevant than you are right here." He stood up, patted me on the shoulder and said, "Stick it out. Gets better. The money gets better, the work gets more interesting, and you get more control. Don't trade a seat at the king's table for a comfortable chair in the servants' quarters." And then he left. I sat there for an hour in the silent office, the city lights twinkling outside my window. His words were meant to be inspiring, a call to arms. But all I felt was a cold, creeping dread. He hadn't sold me on staying. He had just perfectly, eloquently, and devastatingly described the prison. He revealed that the value system I was supposed to adopt was completely alien to me. I didn't care about being at the center of the financial universe. I didn't care about my deal making the front page of a newspaper. And he had just confirmed that leaving meant accepting a life of professional irrelevance. He thought he was showing me the glory of the king's table. All I saw was a life spent fighting for scraps, desperate for the king's approval. That's when I realized the horrifying truth. The problem wasn't the job. It wasn't the firm, the hours, or the stress. I could change all of those things. The problem was the law itself. The problem was the person I had to become to succeed in it. The escape I needed wasn't from a company. It was from a career. I hadn't just chosen the wrong job. I had chosen the wrong life. And breaking free from that wouldn't just mean breaking my golden handcuffs. It would mean breaking the very identity I had spent the last decade of my life building. It would mean breaking myself. And for a while, that's exactly what I did. I broke. Not in a dramatic, movie-like fashion, with a big resignation speech and a triumphant walk out of the office. It was a quieter, more insidious kind of breaking. It was the slow daily erosion of the self. It was showing up to the office and feeling like I was putting on a costume, the suit and tie, a heavy, suffocating uniform for a war I no longer believed in. It was sitting in meetings, hearing the familiar cadence of legal arguments, the posturing, the intellectual jousting, and feeling a profound sense of alienation, as if I were watching a foreign film without subtitles. I understood the words, but the meaning, the purpose had evaporated. My identity as a lawyer had been my armor. It was the answer to every question at a dinner party. It was the source of my parents' pride. It was the justification for my student debt. But when I finally admitted to myself that I hated it, that armor didn't just fall off. It shattered. And underneath there was nothing. Just a hollowed-out person who had forgotten who he was before he was a lawyer. I had spent so long defining myself by what I did that I had no idea who I was. What did I even like to do? What were my hobbies? I drew a complete blank. My hobbies had been reading dense case law and preparing for depositions. My weekends were spent catching up on the work I couldn't finish during the 80-hour week. The person I was at 22 before law school was a ghost, a stranger I couldn't even remember. The breaking point wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts. But there was one that finally bled through the expensive fabric of my suit. I was at my nephew's 7th birthday party. It was a Saturday afternoon, sunny, the smell of cut grass and cheap pizza in the air. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of genuine, uncomplicated joy. I was on the ground helping him assemble a ridiculously complex Lego spaceship, and he was laughing that pure, uninhibited kid laugh that feels like a shot of adrenaline to the soul. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Text, then another. Finally a call. It was a senior partner. I knew I had to take it. I stepped away, my nephew's disappointed face a fresh wound. The partner wasn't calling about a crisis. He was calling because the opposing counsel in a multi-billion-dollar merger had, in the latest draft, changed the word shall to will in a subclause of Section 14B. He was apoplectic. For the next 20 minutes, I stood in the sun, listening to a grown man, a titan of the industry, scream about the semantic difference between two words, a difference that 99.9% of the human population would neither notice nor care about. He demanded I go back to the office right now, to draft a 4-page memorandum on the legal implications of this change, and why we must aggressively repudiate their position. And as I stood there, listening to this manufactured rage, I could see my nephew through the window. He'd given up on me and was now trying to build the Lego spaceship with his dad. And in that moment, the absurdity of my life crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. I was sacrificing real, tangible moments of human connection, the construction of a plastic spaceship, the sound of a child's laughter, for an abstract, meaningless battle over a single word in a document that would ultimately just gather dust in a corporate archive. This wasn't a noble pursuit of justice. This was a hamster wheel in a cage made of money and ego. I hung up the phone, walked back inside, and told my family I had a headache and had to leave. I didn't go to the office. I went home, sat on my couch in the silent, empty apartment, and for the first time, I let myself search for a way out. My first forays into escape were pathetic. They were the frantic, clumsy movements of a man who's been in the dark for so long he's forgotten how to see. I did what every other miserable lawyer does. I typed alternative careers for lawyers into Google. The results were a cruel joke. Legal recruiting, e-discovery consultant, in-house compliance officer. It was like trying to escape prison and being offered a job as a slightly more comfortable guard in a different cell block. The algorithm, the world, could only see my past. It saw JD and big law, and could only imagine variations on that theme. It was trying to sell me a different flavor of the same poison. Then came the second phase, the tyranny of passion. Every article, every podcast, every self-help guru chirped the same advice. Follow your passion. It's a beautiful sentiment. It's also incredibly useless when you've systematically extinguished every spark of passion you ever had in exchange for a stable career. What was my passion? I had no idea. Was it arguing about the word shall? Was it perfecting the art of the passive-aggressive email? I felt a deep sense of shame. Here I was, a supposed success, and I didn't have a passion to follow. It felt like another failure, another exam I hadn't studied for. So I tried to manufacture one. Maybe I could be a baker? I hated waking up early. A carpenter? I once failed to assemble an IKEA bookshelf. A writer? All I'd written for 10 years were legal briefs designed to be as dry and unreadable as possible. This led directly to the third and most dangerous trap for a recovering lawyer: analysis paralysis. My legal training, the very skill set that made me so valuable to my firm, became my worst enemy. I couldn't just try something. I had to de-risk it. I created spreadsheets. I'm not kidding. I had a spreadsheet with potential new careers in the columns and criteria in the rows. Potential income, 5-year growth projection, work-life balance, startup costs, required training. I spent weeks researching, reading, planning. I was building a perfect, airtight, logical case for a new life. But a life isn't a legal argument. You can't win it with logic. All my planning, all my research was just a sophisticated form of procrastination. It was a shield I was building to protect myself from the terrifying reality of taking a real uncertain step. Because the truth is, leaving a high-status profession isn't just a career change. It's a status death. And the fear of that is paralyzing. I realized I was approaching the problem all wrong. I was trying to find a new prepackaged identity to jump into like a hermit crab scuttling from one shell to another. But there was no perfect shell waiting for me. I didn't need a new job title. I needed to remember how to be a person. I needed to do something that had no clear return on investment. Something that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. Something just for me. So one Tuesday night, after another 14-hour day of arguing about contractual indemnification clauses, I did something completely illogical. I didn't apply for a new job. I didn't enroll in business school. I went online and I paid $79 for a 6-week introductory course in pottery at a community center in a neighborhood I'd never been to. It was the most terrifying and irrational thing I had done in a decade. I had no idea if I would be good at it. I had no idea if I would like it. There was no clear career path from associate to potter. It was a small, pointless, and utterly defiant act. It wasn't an escape plan. It was just a crack in the wall of my cell, a tiny pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt since that day with my nephew. A little bit like myself. But that feeling, that tiny spark of self, was terrifying. Because hope is a dangerous thing when you're in a cage. It makes the bars feel colder, the space feel smaller. My first instinct was to smother it, to go back to the comfortable numbness. But I couldn't. The crack in the wall was there, and I couldn't unsee the light. So I did the only thing I could. I started to dig. My escape plan wasn't a stick of dynamite, it was a spoon. It was a slow, methodical, and almost invisible process of tunneling my way out of the life I had built. I couldn't just quit. The golden handcuffs were real, clamped tight around my wrists. The student loans, the mortgage, the lifestyle I had been told I'd earned, they were the guards at the prison gate. A dramatic exit was a fantasy. The reality had to be quieter, more strategic. It started with a flyer I saw pinned to a corkboard at a coffee shop, half hidden behind an ad for a dog walker. It was for a local legal aid clinic. They needed volunteer lawyers for a few hours on a Saturday morning. Just a few hours. To the firm, a Saturday morning was just spillover time for a Friday that wasn't long enough. It was time to catch up on discovery requests or polish a memo. It was billable. But to me, it suddenly represented something else. It was my spoon. The first Saturday, I walked in feeling like an imposter. The clinic was in a church basement, smelling of old paper and cheap coffee. It was a world away from the marble lobbies and panoramic city views I was used to. My suit felt ridiculous. The people there weren't clients. They were people. A single mother fighting an illegal eviction. An elderly man tangled in the bureaucratic nightmare of Social Security benefits. A young immigrant trying to understand a predatory employment contract he'd signed. These weren't billion-dollar disputes. There were no teams of paralegals, no expert witnesses, no high-stakes depositions. The fate of a Fortune 500 company did not hang in the balance. But everything hung in the balance. A woman's home. A man's dignity. A family's future. The stakes were infinitely higher. I was assigned to help a man named Mr. Henderson. He was a retired mechanic in his late 60s whose landlord was trying to evict him from the apartment he'd lived in for 40 years. Using a loophole in a new zoning law. He came in with a plastic grocery bag full of crumpled notices and letters, his hands trembling as he laid them on the folding table between us. He looked at me not with the calculated appraisal of a corporate client, but with the raw, desperate hope of a man at the end of his rope. And I was useless. My entire training, my entire career, had been in complex commercial litigation. I could draft a motion to dismiss a multi-state class action lawsuit in my sleep. I could argue the finer points of securities regulation for hours. But landlord-tenant law? I barely knew where to begin. I felt my face flush with shame. Here was a person who needed a lawyer, a real lawyer, and I was a fraud in a $1,000 suit. I spent that entire Saturday and most of Sunday not billing a single minute to any of my corporate files. Instead, I was in the firm's empty library, surrounded by books I hadn't touched since law school, teaching myself the basics of housing law. I was making calls to other legal aid attorneys, asking stupid questions, feeling like a first-year associate all over again. And it was exhilarating. I was driven by something other than a deadline or a partner's expectation. I was driven by the image of Mr. Henderson's face, the quiet terror in his eyes. Slowly, I started to put a case together. I found a flaw in the landlord's notice. I found a precedent in a recent state court decision. I drafted a response, not on the firm's expensive letterhead, but on a plain Word document I printed at home. The work was intellectually consuming, but in a way that felt like solving a puzzle, not just turning a crank. Of course, the two worlds began to collide. My billable hours for that week were down. Not by a lot, but enough to be noticed. The system is designed to notice. The God of the billable hour is an all-seeing God. My supervising partner, a man named Marcus, called me into his office. It was the friendly check-in. "Everything all right, champ?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, a picture of casual power. "Your numbers were a little soft last week. Just want to make sure you're not getting burned out." It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Burnout was acceptable, even a badge of honor, as long as the hours got billed. A dip in hours, however, suggested a lack of commitment. It suggested you were thinking about something else. And you were not paid to think about something else. I mumbled some excuse about a tough research assignment, a dead end that took longer than expected. He smiled a thin, knowing smile. "Right. Well, just keep your eye on the ball. We've got that big motion for Axon Corp due in 2 weeks. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation. I need you focused." I walked out of his office, the golden handcuffs feeling heavier than ever. He was right. I was losing focus. But he was also wrong. For the first time, I was focusing on what mattered. I was living a double life. By day, I was the diligent associate drafting memos about contractual indemnity clauses for Axon Corporation. But at night, and in the stolen moments between tasks, I was Mr. Henderson's lawyer. I was digging. The breakthrough came a week later. I was on the phone with the landlord's attorney, a smug, overworked guy from a small firm who clearly thought this would be an easy win. I walked him through the flaw in his client's eviction notice, cited the statute, and then mentioned the precedent I'd found. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him shuffling papers. Let me call you back," he finally said, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. He called back an hour later. The eviction was withdrawn. It was that simple. No dramatic courtroom showdown. No triumphant closing argument. Just a phone call. A quiet, anticlimactic victory. I called Mr. Henderson to tell him. He started crying. Not loud, sobbing cries, but the quiet, choked-up tears of a man who had been holding his breath for months and could finally let it go. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "God, thank you. I didn't know what I was going to do. You saved my home." And standing there in the sterile air-conditioned silence of my corporate office, holding a phone that was normally a conduit for stress and anxiety, I felt a seismic shift inside me. This was it. This was the reason. The reason I'd sat through 3 years of torts and civil procedure. The reason I'd pulled all-nighters studying for the bar exam. It wasn't to help Axon Corp increase its profit margin by 0.1%. It was for this. The profound, humbling, life-altering feeling of helping another human being in their moment of greatest need. The armor didn't just crack. A whole piece of it fell away. And the light that came pouring in wasn't just a pinprick anymore. It was a sunbeam. That sunbeam didn't just illuminate the path forward. It scorched the earth of the person I used to be. For the first time in my career, I felt human. Not a legal entity, not a case file number, not a cog in the great grinding machine of justice. Person helping another person. And it felt like breathing real air after years in a pressurized cabin. But here's the thing they don't tell you about sunbeams. They can also burn. That single beautiful moment of connection opened a floodgate. Suddenly, I wasn't just seeing clients. I was seeing their sleepless nights, their children's worried faces, the stack of bills on their kitchen table that they were too scared to open. Every case file I picked up stopped being a collection of facts and statutes. It became a chapter in a human being's life, usually the worst chapter they had ever lived through. And the armor I had spent years meticulously crafting, it was gone. I was walking into battle every single day with my skin turned inside out. The brutal details of a personal injury case weren't just evidence anymore. They were the phantom pains in my own limbs. The quiet desperation in a client's voice during a bankruptcy consultation wasn't just a signal to discuss Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13. It was a knot in my own stomach that wouldn't go away for days. I remember one case in particular. A young couple, their first child, a birth injury. The medicine was complex, the litigation was a beast, but that wasn't the part that broke me. It was the little things. It was the way the father would unconsciously rock back and forth in his chair during our meetings, a phantom soothing motion for a child who would never be soothed. It was the way the mother kept a perfectly organized 3-ring binder of her child's medical records, every page pristine, as if her perfect organization could somehow retroactively fix the imperfect outcome of her delivery. We fought for 2 years. We went up against a hospital with a legal budget that could fund a small country. Their lawyers were sharks, the kind I used to admire. They filed motion after motion, designed not to win on the merits, but to bleed us dry, to make this young couple give up. But they didn't. And I couldn't. I poured everything into it. My nights, my weekends, my savings to keep the expert witnesses funded. I lived inside their story. I knew the name of their child's favorite stuffed animal. I knew the schedule of their physical therapy appointments. Their pain became my fuel. And we won. We secured a settlement that would ensure their child would be cared for the rest of his life. The day we settled, the mother and father hugged me, tears streaming down their faces. They told me I had saved their family. It should have been the greatest day of my professional life. But when I got back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relief. I felt nothing. I was a hollowed-out shell. I sat in the parking garage for an hour, just staring at the concrete wall, unable to even turn the key in the ignition. The sunbeam had burned me out. This is a secret pandemic in the legal world, and in so many other helping professions. It's called compassion fatigue, or secondary traumatic stress. It's the emotional and physical exhaustion that comes from absorbing the trauma of others, day after day. It's the cost of empathy. The very thing that had made me a better, more effective lawyer was now systematically dismantling me from the inside. My life outside the office started to fray. I was physically present at dinner with my family, but my mind was in a sterile hospital room, rereading a doctor's deposition. I would snap at my spouse for no reason. My nerves shot from a day of absorbing anxiety that wasn't even mine. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with cross-examinations and the faces of my clients, their expressions a permanent mixture of hope and fear. I started to build the walls back up, but this time it was different. It wasn't the polished armor of a corporate gladiator. It was the rough, ugly cinder block wall of a survivor. I became cynical. I started seeing the worst in people because for 10 hours a day, that's all I dealt with. Every potential client was a potential liar. Every opposing counsel was a snake. Every judge was biased. The world, which had briefly seemed so full of light and human connection, was once again a dark and threatening place. The worst part was I could see what was happening. I was smart enough to diagnose my own sickness, but I felt powerless to stop it. The classic advice is useless. Just leave it at the office. How? How do you leave someone's life story in a filing cabinet? How do you clock out from a child's future? Don't get emotionally involved. That's like telling a firefighter not to get involved with the fire. The involvement is the entire point of the job. I was on a collision course with total burnout. I seriously considered quitting. I looked at job postings for things that had no human stakes. Data entry, corporate compliance, anything where the worst part of your day was a spreadsheet that didn't balance. Anything where another person's life didn't hang in the balance of your ability to formulate a coherent argument after 3 hours of sleep. The breaking point came during a consultation with a new client, an older man who had lost his wife in a car accident. He was telling me the story, his voice quiet and cracking. He wasn't talking about the crash dynamics or the insurance policy limits. He was talking about how she used to hum when she gardened, how she made the best apple pie he'd ever tasted, how the house was so quiet now it felt like the walls were screaming. And I felt nothing. I was listening, I was nodding, I was taking notes on the legally relevant facts. But the emotional connection was gone. The sunbeam was gone. There was just a cold professional void. I had built my walls so high to protect myself that I had bricked myself inside. I was safe from the pain, but I was also locked away from the purpose. In that moment, watching that grieving man, I realized I had two choices. I could quit and save what was left of myself, or I could figure out a third way. A way to be both empathetic and sustainable. A way to hold someone's pain without being crushed by it. A way to be a conduit for justice, not a reservoir for trauma. It meant I had to do the one thing lawyers are trained never to do. Admit I needed help. It started with a phone call to a therapist who specialized in working with first responders. A lawyer, was a first responder to a different kind of emergency, a legal, financial, and emotional emergency. I started talking to other lawyers, not in the usual chest-thumping way we do at bar association mixers, but in quiet, honest conversations. I found I wasn't alone. Far from it. We were an entire army of the walking wounded, all pretending we were fine. We started sharing strategies. Not legal strategies, but survival strategies. One lawyer told me about his non-negotiable rule of taking a long walk in the woods every Saturday. No phone, no connection to the world, just to let the quiet seep back in. Another, a tough-as-nails criminal defense attorney, showed me the meditation app on her phone that she used for 10 minutes before every major court appearance. It wasn't about emptying her mind. It was about acknowledging the anxiety, the fear, the stress, and letting it pass through her instead of taking root inside her. I learned to build a different kind of armor. It wasn't made of steel and cynicism. It was more like a permeable membrane. It was a conscious practice of professional empathy, where I could allow myself to connect deeply with a client's situation in our meetings, to truly understand and feel their struggle, but then to have a ritual for letting it go when I left the office. For me, it was music. I'd get in my car and put on something loud and completely unrelated to the emotional tone of my day. A mental rinsing. It wasn't a magic fix. There are still bad days. There are still cases that haunt me. But I was no longer just a passive victim of the emotional shrapnel of my job. I was an active participant in my own well-being. I had finally started to figure out how to save myself from the job that was supposed to be about saving others. The next question was, could I do this job without losing myself to the system all over again? Because the system itself, well, the system hadn't changed at all. It was still a jungle. And now I had to walk back into it, not with armor, but with something far more fragile and far more powerful. A conscience. Walking back into a courthouse with a conscience is like walking into a sword fight armed with a moral compass. Everyone else is geared for battle, and you're just trying to figure out which way is north. The air didn't smell like justice. It smelled the same as it always had. A sterile blend of old paper, cheap coffee, and low-grade anxiety. The marble floor still echoed with the hurried footsteps of people whose fates were being decided by arguments, by loopholes, by the sheer exhaustion of the other side. Nothing had changed. But I had. And that made everything different. My first case back wasn't a high-profile murder trial or a multi-million-dollar corporate dispute. It was painfully, tragically ordinary. A young man, let's call him Leo, accused of possession with intent to distribute. He was picked up on a corner known for dealing, had a backpack with enough product to trigger the intent statute, and a priors list that read like a cry for help. By the old playbook, this was a simple, almost mechanical case. The goal was clear. Attack the stop, challenge the chain of custody, file a dozen motions to clog the system, and try to negotiate the felony down to a lesser charge, get him probation, and collect my fee. It was a numbers game. You punch the clock, you run the plays, you move the piece on the board. The old me would have seen Leo as a fact pattern, a set of legal challenges to be overcome. I would have advised him to say nothing, to trust me, and I would have gone to war with the prosecutor, using every procedural weapon in my arsenal. Winning would mean getting the charges dropped on a technicality, or getting him the lightest possible sentence regardless of the truth. But the new me sat across from Leo in a small windowless conference room and actually listened. And what I heard wasn't a fact pattern. It was a story of a kid who'd been cycling through the system since he was 14. A foster care system that had failed him, a school system that had labeled him, a job market that had locked him out. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a kingpin. He was a survivor, making a series of terrible decisions from a menu of even worse options. He told me with a kind of weary resignation that yeah, he was selling. He needed to pay for his grandmother's medication. A story the prosecutor would shred. A story a jury might not even be allowed to hear. A story that, in the cold calculus of the law, was completely irrelevant. But it wasn't irrelevant to me. Not anymore. So I did something my old colleagues would have called professional malpractice. I started talking to him about his life. Not his case, his life. What did he want? Not from the case, but from the next 5 years. For the first time, I wasn't just his lawyer. I was his counselor in the truest sense of the word. And I gave him the one thing the system is designed to strip away: a choice. I laid out the options. Option A, I said, is the old way. We fight this tooth and nail. I can probably find a weakness in the police report. We might get lucky. Best case, you walk. Worst case, the prosecutor gets angry that we wasted their time and you get hit with the maximum sentence. It's a gamble. A big one. Option B, I continued, is different. You take responsibility. Not for being a bad person, but for this specific action. We go to the prosecutor not with threats but with a plan. A plan for you to get into a drug treatment program, to get your GED, to find stable work. We don't ask for a dismissal. We ask for a chance. We argue that sending you to prison is a waste of a human life and a waste of taxpayer money. It's a harder path. It means admitting you did something wrong. It means you'll have a record. But it might be the first step toward actually getting out of this cycle, instead of just pausing it. He just stared at me. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He'd had public defenders who were too busy and private attorneys who were too slick. No one had ever presented him with a choice that involved his own humanity. He asked, "Which one will get me less time?" And I told him the truth. I don't know. Option A is a roll of the dice for freedom. Option B is a negotiation for your future. This is the central insanity of the American legal system. It's a system of risk analysis, not rehabilitation. It's a casino where your life is the currency. We have turned justice into a game of probabilities. We advise clients on the odds, not on what's right. We talk about the probability of a judge's mood, the statistical likelihood of a jury's bias, the chances of a key witness not showing up. We have monetized and quantified every variable except the one that matters, the person at the center of it all. Leo chose option B. My colleagues thought I was insane. You're pleading him out? Without a fight. The kids got a decent motion to suppress. One of them told me over coffee, "You're just giving the DA a free win." They saw it as a weakness, a surrender. In the gladiatorial arena of the law, seeking a constructive, rehabilitative outcome is seen as an admission of defeat. You didn't crush your opponent. You cooperated. It was heresy. The prosecutor was just as confused. She was a young, ambitious attorney, trained in the same adversarial school as I was. I walked into her office and she was ready for a fight. She had her files spread out, her counter-arguments prepared. I didn't make a single argument about the evidence. Instead, I handed her a file of my own. It contained a list of local trade programs, a letter of conditional acceptance from a GED course, and a handwritten statement from Leo about why he wanted to change. I said, "My client is guilty of the act. He's not guilty of being the person you think he is. Let's make a deal that serves the community instead of just serving the statute." She looked at me like I had two heads. This wasn't how the game was played. The game was about leverage. I had just handed her all of mine. She could have laughed in my face and told me she'd see us at trial. And for a moment I think she was about to. The system, the machine, was grinding its gears, ready to process Leo like every other case file. But then she stopped. She actually read the letter. She looked at the program brochures. And I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe it was exhaustion from the endless battles. Maybe it was a flicker of the idealism that led her to law school in the first place. She didn't agree right away. Took weeks of negotiation. We weren't haggling over years but over conditions. Mandatory counseling, weekly check-ins, community service at a food bank. In the end, Leo pleaded guilty to a lesser offense. He got 5 years of probation, but it was a probation tied to a concrete, actionable life plan. He didn't get off. He didn't beat the rap. By the standards of every lawyer I knew, I had failed him. I hadn't gotten the charges dismissed. I had put a conviction on his record. But a year later I got a call. It was Leo. He'd finished his GED. He was working as an apprentice electrician. He told me his grandmother was doing okay. He said for the first time in his life, he felt like he was building something instead of just trying not to fall. That was the win. It wasn't a not guilty verdict that echoed in a courtroom. It was a quiet phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. And it was more satisfying than any legal victory I had ever achieved in my old life. I hadn't won a case. I had helped a person change the trajectory of their life. But this one small victory revealed a terrifyingly large truth. The system isn't just broken. It's working perfectly according to its own flawed design. It's designed to manage, process, and punish. It is not designed to heal, to restore, or to understand. To work within it with a conscience is a constant, exhausting act of rebellion. You're not just fighting for your client. You're fighting the very machinery of the profession itself. And I was beginning to understand that this rebellion came at a cost. Because for every prosecutor who was willing to listen, there were 10 who weren't. For every judge who saw a human being, there were 5 who only saw a docket number. And I was about to face a case so big, so entrenched in that cynical machinery, that one small human victory wouldn't be nearly enough to survive it. The case was called the Vansar litigation. It didn't have a dramatic name, no catchy media moniker. It was just a sterile, court-assigned label for what would become a war of attrition against a titan of the pharmaceutical industry. It began, as these things often do, not as a single explosive event, but as a slow creeping tide of human misery. The first client was a retired schoolteacher named Eleanor. She came in with her son, carrying a shoebox full of pill bottles and medical bills. The drug was supposed to manage her arthritis. A miracle, they called it on the commercials. What it gave her instead was irreversible kidney damage. She was on dialysis 3 times a week, her life reduced to the hours between treatments. Her story was tragic, but in the legal world, tragedy is a commodity. A single case against a company like Vansar was like throwing a pebble at a battleship. They'd settle for a nuisance fee, bury it in confidentiality, and move on. But then came another client. A construction worker in his 40s, a man built like a brick house, now so weak from liver failure, he could barely climb the single step into my office. Same drug. Then a young mother, whose child was born with a heart defect after she'd taken Vansar's perfectly safe medication during pregnancy. One by one they came. Dozens of them. All connected by the same prescription, the same broken promises, and the same life-shattering consequences. This wasn't a pebble. This was the beginning of an avalanche. We filed a class action lawsuit. And in that moment I went from being a lawyer to being a target. Vansar didn't just have a legal department. They had a legal army, quartered in a glass and steel tower in Manhattan. The firm they hired was a name you see on stadiums and art museums. Their lead counsel was a man who billed more in an hour than I made in a month. And their opening move was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. They filed a motion to dismiss, arguing our claims were baseless. That wasn't the attack. The attack was the motion itself. It was over 2,000 pages long, with 10,000 pages of exhibits attached. It was a paper nuke. The strategy is called discovery abuse. In theory, discovery is how both sides get the facts. In practice, for a defendant with bottomless pockets, it's a weapon. They requested every single email I had ever sent that mentioned the case. They demanded decades of medical records from every one of the nearly 100 plaintiffs. They scheduled depositions in 15 different states, forcing my small firm to spend a fortune on travel. They weren't fighting the facts of the case. They were attacking our resources. Their goal wasn't to prove their innocence in court. Their goal was to make sure we never ever got there. They were trying to bankrupt us, to exhaust us, to make the cost of seeking justice so impossibly high that we would simply give up. For 6 months my life became a blur of paper. We rented a separate office space just to hold the documents they were producing. My paralegal, a brilliant woman named Maria, started sleeping on a cot in the office. We lived on stale coffee and the grim satisfaction of knowing that every box we cataloged, every page we read, was a tiny act of defiance. The plaintiffs, my clients, would call, their voices trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "How's it going?" they'd ask. And I'd have to tell them, "We're still fighting over scheduling orders. They're arguing about the font size on a subpoena." How do you explain to a woman whose life is measured by dialysis appointments that the legal system is currently debating the definition of the word document? The cynicism I'd seen in the smaller courts was nothing compared to this. This was the machine in its ultimate form. It was a system designed by the powerful for the powerful. Judges, overwhelmed by the sheer volume, would urge us to settle. "Counselor," one said to me in chambers, "you have to be realistic. This isn't a movie. You're not going to get your big courtroom moment. Take the offer. Get your clients something." The offer he was referring to was Vansar's first settlement proposal, $10,000 per plaintiff, and a gag order so complete it would have been a crime to even mention the drug's name again. $10,000 for a ruined life. For a future stolen. I looked at the judge, a man who had sworn an oath to administer justice, and I saw he wasn't a villain. He was just tired. He was another gear in the machine trying to keep the docket moving. My clients weren't people to him. They were a backlog. The turning point came late one Tuesday night. I was in the document warehouse, surrounded by a canyon of cardboard boxes, my eyes burning from reading thousands of pages of chemical trial data. And I found it. It was a single email, buried in a folder, inside a subfolder, mislabeled as cafeteria menu planning. It was from Vansar's lead research scientist to the head of marketing. The date was 3 years before the drug ever hit the market. It said, and I will never forget the words, The renal toxicity in the rat trials is alarming. We cannot proceed to human testing without significant reformulation. The potential for long-term kidney failure is not a risk. It is a statistical certainty. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the smoking gun. The thing they had spent millions of dollars to hide. They knew. They knew all along. They knew their miracle drug was poison, but the profit margins were too good to pass up. They weighed human lives on a balance sheet and decided they were a rounding error. I made 100 copies. I put them in a safe in my car at my home, and mailed one to my mother in a sealed envelope with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. Because I knew with absolute certainty that the moment they found out we had this, the war would change. They would no longer be fighting the lawsuit. They would be fighting me. We filed the email with the court as evidence. 2 days later, Vancer's lawyers filed an emergency motion to have me sanctioned. They accused me of stealing proprietary information, of hacking their servers. They lied. They knew exactly how we got it, through their own document dump, but they were creating a cloud of confusion. They were trying to discredit the evidence by discrediting me. My own character was now on trial. They subpoenaed my law school records, my tax returns, my personal emails. They hired a private investigator to talk to my ex-girlfriend, my neighbors, the owner of the bar I went to on Fridays. They were looking for anything. A mistake, a weakness, a secret. Something they could use to crush me, not as a lawyer but as a person. The pressure was immense. My other cases suffered. My relationships frayed. I stopped sleeping. Every waking moment was consumed by the case. I was no longer just representing the plaintiffs. I felt like I was carrying their pain, their anger, their desperate hope for a sliver of justice. And Vancer knew it. They knew the weak point in any David and Goliath story isn't David's arm. It's his mind. It's the crushing weight of the odds. One evening, the lead counsel for Vancer called my cell phone directly. A man who refused to even make eye contact with me in the courthouse was now calling me after hours. His voice was smooth like expensive whiskey. He didn't threaten. He sympathized. He talked about how grueling this must be for a small-time lawyer like me. He mentioned the cost, the stress. And then he made the offer. It wasn't for my clients. It was for me. Drop the case. Walk away. And a 7-figure payment would be wired to an account of my choosing. Enough money to never have to work another day in my life. All I had to do was betray every single person who was counting on me. He said, "Everyone has a price. I'm just trying to find yours." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting his words curdle between us. My hands were perfectly still on the table. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs, but on the outside I was stone. I looked him dead in the eye, the same way I look at a hostile witness on the stand. I leaned forward just an inch and my voice came out low and steady, a piece of sharpened flint. "You can't find what isn't for sale." His smile didn't falter. It just changed. It became less of a negotiation tactic and more of a warning. "A noble sentiment," he said, taking a slow sip of his water. "But nobility doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't protect you. And it certainly doesn't win impossible cases." He placed the glass down with a soft click. "Think about it. This isn't an offer. It's a life raft. Your clients, those poor, hopeful people, they're going to lose. It's inevitable. The system is designed for it. You can either go down with the ship, a martyr nobody remembers, or you can step onto my yacht and sail off into the sunset. The choice is yours. But it won't be on the table forever." I stood up. The meeting was over. "My clients trusted me," I said. "That's worth more than your yacht." As I walked away, I didn't look back, but I could feel his eyes on me. It wasn't the look of a defeated opponent. It was the look of a predator who had just confirmed the nature of his prey. He now knew I wouldn't be bought, which meant I had to be broken. The next few weeks were a descent into a special kind of hell. The legal battle in the courtroom was nothing compared to the war being waged outside of it. It started subtly. A key witness for our side suddenly recanted his testimony. He called my office, his voice trembling, saying he misremembered the details. He wouldn't say why. He didn't have to. I knew. A week later, a crucial piece of evidence, a set of internal memos we had fought for months to get, was ruled inadmissible by a judge on a technicality so flimsy it was transparent. The judge had been appointed just 6 months prior, with heavy lobbying from a group with deep ties to the corporation I was suing. Coincidence? In this world, there are no coincidences. My paranoia grew into a constant companion. Every car that lingered too long on my street, every unfamiliar click on my phone line, every email that seemed just a little too odd, it all fed the beast. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob. I varied my route to the office every day. Was I being dramatic? Or was I just now understanding the rules of the game I was in? This wasn't a lawsuit anymore. It was a war of attrition, and my opponent had an infinite army. They weren't just trying to outmaneuver me in court. They were trying to dismantle my life piece by piece, to make me so tired, so scared, so alone that I would just give up. My team felt it too. My brilliant, young paralegal, Sarah, who could find a needle in a digital haystack, started coming to work with dark circles under her eyes. One afternoon, she came into my office and closed the door. She told me her student loan application, which had been pre-approved, was suddenly denied. The reason given was potential involvement in high-risk litigation. It was a ghost reason, a phantom justification, but the message was crystal clear. Work for him and your future is at risk. She was terrified. She asked me, her voice barely a whisper, "Is it worth it?" That was the question, wasn't it? I was asking myself the same thing every night as I stared at the ceiling. I looked at this bright, scared young woman, whose only crime was believing in the work we were doing. And I knew I had to give her an honest answer. "I don't know if it's worth it," I said. "But I know what happens if we stop. They win. Not just this case. They win the idea that you can bully and buy your way out of anything. That people like our clients don't matter. I can't live with that. But I won't ask you to risk your future for it." She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the fear give way to something else. Resolve. "My grandmother worked in one of their factories for 30 years, she said. "She was one of the people they poisoned. So yes, it's worth it." That was the moment everything changed. Thorne's mistake was thinking he could break us apart. Instead, he forged us into a weapon. We weren't just a legal team anymore. We were a resistance. We stopped playing his game. We started playing our own. We knew we couldn't win on the established battlefield, because he owned the battlefield. So we had to move the war to a new front. We had to go public. We started leaking information. Not confidential client information, but details about their legal tactics. The witness intimidation. The judicial influence. We gave it to a handful of trusted, independent journalists who were hungry for a real story. We used the very system of information they weaponized against them. Suddenly, small articles began to appear online. Blog posts. A podcast episode. It was just a trickle at first, but it was enough to make them nervous. Then we got our miracle. A name passed to us from a source who got it from another source. A ghost. A former executive in the company's risk management division. A man named David Chun. He had been fired years ago for insubordination. The official story was that he was a disgruntled employee. The truth? He had tried to blow the whistle from the inside. He had written a comprehensive report detailing the dangers of their product, the corners they were cutting, and the projected number of illnesses and deaths. He sent it all the way to the CEO. They had not only ignored him, they had buried the report and systematically destroyed his career. Finding him was like hunting a phantom. He had moved 3 times, changed his name, and was working a menial job completely off the grid. He was a man living in fear. It took Sarah 2 solid weeks of digital forensics, cross-referencing old property records and social media footprints of distant relatives, but she found him. I flew out to meet him in a dingy diner 1,000 miles from home. He was a shell of the man in his old corporate headshot. He was gaunt, his eyes constantly darting towards the door. He was convinced they were still watching him. He was probably right. I sat down and I didn't give him a legal speech. I just told him about our clients. I told him about the grandmother who couldn't hold her own grandchild, the father who couldn't work to support his family, the community decimated by a single corporate decision made in a boardroom half a country away. I told him about the bribe, the threats, the pressure. I laid it all bare. He listened, his hands wrapped around a cold coffee cup. For a long time he said nothing. "They took everything from me," he finally whispered. "My job, my reputation, my house. My wife left. They told me if I ever spoke a word of this to anyone, they would make sure my kids wouldn't be able to get into college, that they'd never get a decent job. They said they owned the future." "They don't," I said. "They just want you to think they do. That report you wrote, David. Do you still have a copy?" He looked at me, and for the first time, a flicker of the old fire returned to his eyes. He didn't answer. He just nodded once. And in that single silent gesture I knew. We finally had a chance. Not just to win a case, but to get justice. The kind of justice that can't be bought and can't be buried. The kind you have to fight for, tooth and nail in the dark against a monster. This is the untold story. It's not about the closing arguments or the dramatic aha moments in court you see in movies. It's about the quiet, terrifying conversations in diners. It's about finding the courage in others when your own is running low. It's about understanding that the law isn't just a profession. When you're up against an enemy with infinite resources, it becomes the only weapon you have left. And you have to be willing to use it no matter the cost.